Okay, so this is our second project, which is going to be a ring with a stone. Specifically, we're working with cabochons. I guess technically you could do this with like a pebble or a rock or something irregular. It is certainly going to be easier if you have a cabochon because it is calibrated, a specific size. Cabochons are stones that are flat on the bottom and domed on the top. So they offer some consistency. It's going to be a little bit easier to set one of these, but I could use a rock. That one's still a little bit like put together, right? But I could do a rock, like a beach rock, a lake rock, a river rock, in this type of method too. So we're still going to be using tabs. We're just going to use them to hold a three-dimensional object instead of a flat piece of paper. So we're going to be doing a ring. Let me move these. So I'm going to start the same way I started my other ring, which is to figure out my ring size using my multi-sizer from Mirbox, and then to mark out the length of that. So I believe I made a 7.5 last time, and it was 56 point something millimeters. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark that out. I'm also, the ring I'm making, I do want to have a little bit of a gap, so I'm gonna subtract a few. I'm just gonna go with 55-ish. For an adjustable ring, you have a little bit of leeway on making it the exact size, so I can kind of play around with that. I don't need it to be exact, which is one nice thing about an adjustable ring. So that's the length I want my piece to be, and I'm going to go ahead and sketch out my design to include a space for one of these stones. We're going to have a few of these in the studio available if you want to use one. If you have your own, you may use those as well. But I'm going to actually choose this middle size one and do a sketch around that. Okay, I have a loose outline of what I want it to look like. I'm doing a pretty organic band, so it is okay if I kind of get off from this a little bit. But that's where my stone is going to go, right there in the middle. I want this to be on top and to have this guy wrap around and kind of like come off to the side. So make sure you make a paper cutout, cut it out, wrap it around just to kind of check the size. Okay, I have this cut out, and I want to kind of put my stone or pebble on there so I can get, whoops. Ideally, I would like to glue it down or double stick tape it down to try to get it on there without it moving around. I'm gonna be a little impatient for that, but normally I would let that sit there, let it dry so it's stuck on there. And now I want to plan out where I want my tabs to be. So I'm gonna do it a little bit different than my pendant. If I wanted to, I could just kind of cut 4 little slits in and something like this. So I could cut in on those 2 lines, and then that will be my tab that I can fold up. I am going to do a little bit of a different style, so it's going to kind of end up looking like fringe a little bit. So I'm just going to cut in a whole bunch of lines, and then all the way around, lots of little itty bitty lines, and then I will fold up a couple of those little pieces. There's goes, good Sharpie. Okay, a bunch of little lines in there, and actually before I cut all those, I'm I'm going to go ahead and file around this outside edge. If I wait until I make all those cuts, they're going to be bending all over the place. So file this part before I make all those cuts. Pausing for a second just to kind of give you some tips and tricks of cutting these little tiny things on a very thin piece of metal. Like what we're using can be a little bit difficult, so I want to, just kind of remind you of some things that will help you cut something like this. So I do want to, when I'm starting a cut, to start up, just a few little motions up only, and that will give me a little bitty notch in my edge. And once I have that, it's going to be a lot easier to start cutting. So get that first. If I just start like this, like it's going to pull down and bend quite a bit. This will help protect against bends. I'm also just sawing pretty slowly and gently. Not pulling down very hard because that's what's going to kind of bend it. I'm also sawing right up near the back, this little point of my bench pin. It's totally fine if you saw into the wood. That is actually what I'm doing, just because it helps provide support for your metal so the saw blade isn't just bending it downwards. So I'm varying the widths a little bit of the pieces that are left, like the metal in between my saw cuts. Some of them are also coming a little further into the center than the others. That one's shorter, that one's longer. Wherever I do want my tabs to be, I want them to be, oh goodness, metal, shiny, the same length. So I could pull this piece right here to be a tab, but I wouldn't want to do either one of these two because it has the shorter line. So if you're kind of thinking of where you want them to be, just make sure those two cuts are the same depth into the metal. Okay, so this is what we have right now. It's not perfectly totally round, but it's pretty close. I just made that last video time-lapse when I was talking the whole time. So my metal is thin enough that I can kind of adjust it. And what I was saying is I want the metal underneath my stone to be flat, but I can have curve like right up to the edges. So I'm gonna curve that a little bit more once my stone is in there. My metal is quite thin, so I can do this later. Like, it doesn't all have to be done ahead of time, unless I want to. If I was using thicker metal, I would need to plan a little bit more. Okay, but I was talking about these prongs, so tabs. I want them to be the same size. Right now, there's a couple that are way longer and taller, and technically I could leave them like that, but I think it looks better if they're a little bit neater. So I want them to come up about this far. Like, I wanted to start curving, following the curve of my cab. For a more irregular stone, you're still going to do the same process, but I want to fold up tabs where I would have like a little bit of a dent in my rock so that they kind of like clamp that down. Essentially we're just making little clamps. So I like the size of this one, and I'm going to make the other ones to match. I've made all my prongs the same size, so now I'm going to use my pliers to kind of fold them over. I just like to use the back and kind of like push to start with, but I can also, oops, gently squeeze. Oh, I just turned. I'm actually probably going to pull up one more prong because I think it could be a little more secure in there. So once I put them and kind of squish them down and tighten them, I can kind of tap on my stone or a rock or whatever you have in there and try to see if it's loose. So this is a little bit loose in there, and my prongs are all the way down. So I'm just gonna add one more, pull one more up to add a 5th point of security. And after I do that, I can put it back on my mandrel, do a little bit more hammering or shaping. If I wanted to, I can pull more of these like up a little bit and kind of create a ruffle effect. So now I can kind of just like play with it and have a little fun on how I want my flower to look. So I think I'm going to form it a little bit more round to go with the curvature of my finger. Now I can try this on. It's fitting me pretty well. Actually can adjust now too if I want to. Like, I don't really like this thing, I'm just gonna cut it off so I have a little more of a gap. And that's it.